All right. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Yumnaa and I teach English. I teach English to GCE, IGCSE, O level, A level, you name it, I teach it. I do that in the morning usually, and sometimes I do that in the evening as well. Just one class. I don't take more than one because I believe in providing quality education. I can only do that if I take on one class. So, before I start, what I was doing was that I spent the entire day thinking about, in fact, the entire week, ever since I announced this class, thinking about what topic I should teach you guys. And because I'm a big fan of narrative, I was like, okay, let's start with narrative. But then again, when you talk about narrative, there are so many things that come to your mind. And then you're like, I can do this and I can do that. But then what should I start with? And I kept on thinking, start, start, start. So let's just teach them the starting of a narrative. Because when you talk about narratives, there are so many things that go into it GC, IT, A level English, no matter which aspect of English you take up and you discuss. Narratives are always there. That's something that everybody writes about. Maximum kids write about. Let's talk about that. So today we're doing something that I genuinely wished someone had taught me when I was sitting for my exams. And that is how to write down the very first line of your narrative. Because the opening line, we underestimate just how important that is. So we're not going to talk about the entire essay, not the organization, not the structure, not the paragraphing, not the climax, characterization, dialogue, none of that, not the ending, the middle, none of that. We're only going to discuss how to write down a killer opening and ensure that by the end of this class, you would have hopefully learned how to write that down. So let's start with that. And by the end of this lesson, like I said, you will hopefully know how to write down a really interesting narrative. Um, I will keep on adding students as they come in. So let's begin. All right. So why does your opening line even matter? Now, if you want, you can take a screenshot of this. All of the slides that I will be showing you guys, I will be annotating them side by side as well. So you can write that down as well, any annotation that comes your way. Or you can simply listen to what I'm saying and maybe write that down, or just, absorb it. And maybe that works as well. Anything that works for you works for me. So, why are we making such a big deal out of the first 10 words? Because here's how marking works in real life: an examiner picks up your script, they read the very first line, and in that moment, I promise you, an impression is being formed. And that impression is going to last till the end of your narrative. And you guys are, as for any other kid, you are competing against hundreds and thousands of kids all over the world. So that first impression that is being formed and the tone that the first 10 words are setting up, it's something that will stay with your examiner for the rest of the entire script. So that is really, really, really important that you understand how you do it. You have to understand that you need to start with something that is memorable. So, the first word that I'm going to ask you to write down somewhere is that your starting has to be memorable, something that makes the examiner think, okay, this kid knows what they're doing. So, here's the thing: we are going to talk about something. How do you end up with level 5 and 6? By the way, those of you who don't know, in an IGCSE exam, if I were to give you a quick sum up, the narrative is of 40 marks. And in a GCE exam, the narrative is of 25 marks. So we are looking at paper 2, section B, like it says here currently. So 40 marks and 25 marks. This is not, a tiny amount of mark at all. These are a lot of marks, and you need to ensure how you get down with that. All right, so a strong opening doesn't just impress, it protects you. How does it protect you? How does a strong opening protect a candidate? Because an examiner who is engaged in your narrative will read your work more generously. So it does put you ahead of other candidates before you even begin. That is something that I want you to understand. Why am I going through all of this preamble? That's primarily because I want you to understand, why are we doing this? Why are we even discussing the first 10 or so ish words of your narrative? So let's move forward. What are a few things that we have in mind when we take forward? By the way, this thing that I want to show you is based on real examiner feedback. So if you take a look at this and an examiner, suppose they pick up a script and the first line makes them sit up, the examiner is thinking, okay, level five or level six. By the way, what do I mean by level five or level six? Just to let you guys know, for instance, an IG paper, let's talk about that for a bit. The 40 marks are divided into 16 and 24. So 24 is for your SPAG, which we call spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and 16 marks are for your content. So your content includes your plot, your, characterization, your dialogue, your descriptive elements, basically everything that amounts to a good narrative. So when we say, for instance, level 6 and level 5, we are for level 6, we are generally looking at, for instance, 14, 15, and 16 out of 16 marks. And for level 5, we're thinking somewhere along the lines of 12, 13, and 14 marks. The point is that we are looking at a higher band or a higher level. So what are a few things that really makes them, lean in, and the kind of language that's really going to make sure that your examiner admires you and everything? That is something that I will get to you in a bit, but I just want you to focus on a few things here. Number one, dream starters. So this is something that I want you to write down, something that you are never supposed to do, and that is to start off your story with a dream. So for instance, why is that? Because it's a very cliched opening. It ends up being a very boring beginning, and we don't want that. We want to really ensure that from the very first sentence, the examiner is really hooked in. Next, talking about the weather. So, discussing it was a dark and stormy night, it was a dark and stormy day, it was a bright sunny day. It's too boring, you're wasting words. So, again, weather based starts, we're going to ignore that as well. Thirdly, and most importantly, something that we call giving a background story. So, for instance, Aisha was, or I'm not a very big fan of South Asian names. So, for instance, Samantha was a 16-year-old girl who had just joined college. It's very boring, does not get the point across. I swear to God, it's going to make your examiner bored out of his wits. So we don't do that as well. So what then? What are we going to ensure that we end up giving our examiners so that they are actually reeled in? Honestly speaking, I'm a very big fan of dialogue based openings. So you can absolutely do that, which is something that we call direct speech as well. So you can say that as well. There are so many things that you see in the green box. I'm not going to read them out because that's not the point of today's class. The point of today's discussion is to let you guys know of how you can ensure that we have a really interesting beginning, and reading the slides is not one of it. So you can absolutely start with a question, and that is also something that I'm a very big fan of. So you can absolutely start with a question. And that is also, something that is going to make the examiner reel in. Then there's something that we call in medias res. We'll get to that in a bit, but in medias res is a Latin term, which is something that stands for in the middle of. So what you do is you start off with the middle part of the story, and you literally, how we say, you throw your reader into the story. So there's no backdrop and there's nothing of that sort. And by the way, the example that I always give my students is that of the movie Megamind. Most of you may have seen that movie. I really like that movie as well. So what happens in this movie is that the character, the blue alien-ish creature, is falling from the sky, and then he's like, oh, you want to know how he got to that situation? And then he's like, oh, let me take you back. So it's a very interesting start, fun start. Everyone's wondering where he got to the point where he's falling from the sky. And then he goes on to, sort of get to that point. So that is also something. Now, in medias res is a topic in itself, and I can spend another 40 minutes just talking about this, but again, I won't do that. The point is, start in the middle of the action, and that looks really amazing, and examiners love it. Why am I constantly talking about, oh, examiners love this and examiners love that? Because I want you to know that even though you are from Pakistan, or maybe, I'm assuming that most of you are from, for instance, Pakistan. The thing is that the examiner doesn't care. And I'm sorry if I'm coming across as a bit bold, but that's the truth. Examiner doesn't care whether you're from Pakistan or India or Bangladesh or somewhere else. All that they care about is that they have a script in front of them, and this is the narrative, and this was the question that was given, and it's a 40-mark question, and they have to grade it. So they don't care if you have had a good exposure to English when you were growing up. or you have had an excellent exposure, or you're mediocre at English. They don't care about any of that. What they care about is the script that they have and how they're going to market. And so, because they are a bit bold when it comes to that, you need to be a bit bold when you are writing a narrative as well. So, boldness, difference. That's basically what we're getting at. So I want you to take a quick look at these two openings that we have. It's the same story, the same opening, by the way, the same opening to the same story. However, one is slightly boring because it talks about the weather and it starts giving, a background. And that is exactly something that I said we're not going to do. And then the second one jumps to something really interesting. So let's take a look at this. Same prompt, different story is what I'm trying to say. So beautiful day, sun was shining. I was happy. I decided to go outside. I decided to see something. Um, and then something happened that would change my life forever. Sure, you are eventually getting to the part which might come across as a bit interesting. But what about the rest of these words? What about the words that you have wasted? And yes, I am going to use the word wasted because we are definitely in a race against time, but we are also in a race against words as well. The word limit is 350 to 450 words, both for IG and GC. And I am not at a liberty at all to waste words. So why on earth would I end up writing something like this? That's not going to give me any mark. I'm not going to do that. So what I will do is that I will jump to something that is impromptu at the very second, at that moment. It's going to get the attention of the reader and you know, actually give me something back. So the letter was still in my hand when I realized I had stopped breathing. Now, again, if, I had opened questions, which I haven't yet, um, you would have noticed how this one question ends up being a very mysterious, suspense based story. How do I know that? The letter was still in her hand, or this writer had stopped breathing, or this character had stopped breathing. So the letter must have contained something which had prompted the character to stop breathing. So again, may have been a ghost of the past, as we say, or may have been something else entirely. Maybe she had given or he had given a test and the result was there, or maybe something that they're not even aware of. But the reader is already asking, what's in that letter? Why is the character, not breathing anymore, metaphorically, of course. So it's very specific, it's to the point, gets the reader's thoughts going, and that is exactly what we want. So we don't want to know that it's a nice day. We don't want to know that the character is happy. We just want to know that there's something interesting that is happening. 13 words, and that is what we're going for. And that is exactly what the next formula is, by the way, something that I've come up with myself, which is why I named it after me. So I'm calling it the Yum formula because, of course, my name is Yumna. So I broke it down into, uh, an interesting acronym that is going to help you remember. So whether again we continue with this or not, whether you take my classes again or not, I'm just hoping that the Yum formula stays with you at least till the end of 2027 when you appear for your exams, or October, November 2026. Right. So what is this? By the way, this is an acronym for those of you who don't know what an acronym is. An acronym is sort of a literary device where you take the first couple of letters, first letter from a couple of words, and then you form another word out of it. And yes, I'm trademarking it because it's based after my name, so why not? So three things. You can write them down somewhere so you remember. You have to memorize this. Yes, I named it after myself. No, I'm not sorry about it. Let's move forward. So the first thing, why? Why is going to stand for your reader. The way that you're going to write on your narrative, your opening line should make the reader ask a question. So you're going to start off with something that is going to prompt or push your reader to ask you a question, right? So whether that's you dropping them mid-scene, whether you're dropping them mid-thought, whether it's a mid-moment kind of an action, whether you are throwing them mid-action, they should be leaning in from the very first sentence. And I think you can understand by now just how much importance I'm putting on the very opening of your narrative, because that's just how important it is. Before the second sentence even begins, the first sentence should already have reeled my reader in. So, for instance, I say the phone rang at 3 a.m. Only one person ever called that late. I don't know who that person is, but I want to know who that person is because why are they calling at 3 a.m.? And, the character already knows who that person is. So I want to know as well. And that is, again, inquisition, basically. I'm being inquisitive as a reader. And that is exactly what we want. So we want the reader to be inquisitive from the very beginning. And the first why refers to that. Your reader ends up being inquisitive. That is something that we want. Next is how you can actually do that. An unexpected detail, for example. Give them something that they weren't expecting. What makes a great novel a great novel? There are so many books that I have bought in my life that are, sitting on my bookshelf at home. And I haven't read beyond the first couple of pages. And there are some books that I could hardly get past the first page. And that is because they were boring. There's no other way to put it. So if your narrative is also boring, then again, that is a problem. So, this is the one detail, the unexpected detail, that transforms these average, mediocre writers into memorable ones. So, swap the obvious thing for the, how do you say it, the very specific. Don't say that a girl was crying. I said, like I wrote here, she didn't care that she was crying into a mug of cold tea. Why was the tea cold? What had prompted her to have, cold tea? Maybe she was a mom. Moms usually do that. So the cold tea, the one detail that tells you everything about how long she's been sitting there, or how much, or how many chores she had to get done with before she eventually sat down to have her tea. That's the power of the unexpected. She had 17 minutes to decide. She spent 14 of them staring at her shoes. Nobody spends 14 minutes of their lives staring at their shoes. That is something that is a given. So this means that she is distracted. Now, this is an unexpected detail. By the way, this is called implicit understanding. For those of you who might know a few words regarding IG and GC. So this is an implicit understanding that I'm like, okay, like I said, nobody in their right mind would sit somewhere and spend 14 minutes staring at their shoes, and yet this girl did that, which means, again, she may have been distracted. Was she being pressured? Was she being blackmailed? Was she simply lost because of something that may have happened in her life? But for better or for worse, she was distracted. And now I need to know what was distracting her. So, this unexpected detail of her life is going to, do that for us. And lastly, because it's yum, the M part stands for mood. Now, again, for those of you who don't know what mood is, mood in writing refers to, there are multiple ways of writing it down, but we can call it the vibe, the vibe that's generated. For those of you who are from Gen Z, I think maximum of you are from Gen Z. We are looking at a certain kind of an atmosphere that's being created. So I need to create a certain kind of an atmosphere right from the very beginning of my narrative. So, and in that, my genre, my tone, my atmosphere, absolutely everything is going to go into it. But how do I do that? This is something that we call, and let me use a lighter color here. It's something that we call betraying, let's call it not betraying the reader. So, you're supposed to not betray the reader. What do I mean by that? Let me take you up for a bit. Here, in the letter that this girl had received, she had stopped breathing. This means that this is setting up a mysterious or a suspense based story. I'm not going to have a happy story with an opening like this. Because if I eventually end up having a happy go lucky, as we say, story with this kind of an opening, then I am doing exactly what I asked you not to do. I am betraying my reader. And that is something that examiners, again, they end up taking that personally because they're like, oh, the kid has no idea what they're doing. This is one opening and the story is somewhere else, and they don't even link with each other. So then that's a problem. So you are supposed to ensure that the opening and the ending and the middle and everything in between links to each other. So don't betray your reader. You have to set a certain kind of an atmosphere from the very beginning, and you have to be loyal to that. You have to, like I'm saying again and again, you're not supposed to betray the reader. Do you want to write a thriller? Your first word should already feel tense. There has to be a very tension based opening if you want to write on a thriller. If you want to write on someone's memoir, for example, then it's supposed to be warm from the very beginning. Or, for example, if you want to write down a scary story, then the very first line has to be very haunting. So, you need to ensure that you don't have the liberty, and I said this if you remember a couple of minutes ago as well, that you don't have the liberty to spend 100 or so words just giving us a backdrop. And then if you think that, okay, maybe I'll change it somewhere later on, you don't have that liberty. You don't have the time, you don't have the energy, you don't have the words. Frankly, you are, you know how we say it, you're in a race against time, you're in a race against pressure, you're lost with words, and you are competing against so many other kids as well. You have to be very, very, very specific. Or, you know how we say in English, you have to make every word earn its keep. This is a metaphorical sentence, but it speaks to everything that I am saying, that every word should earn its keep. What I mean by that is that you need to ensure that every word that you are writing down is relevant to what you are supposed to write on next. So it's supposed to be very linked, cohesive, everything has to come together. So, like I said, from the very first line, you don't have to say, by the way, this is a scary story, or I'm going to write a thriller, or this is supposed to be a thrilling story. No, the first 10 or so words should already imply that. So, for instance, take a look at this. Everything in the room was exactly as she had left it, which was impossible. So it was impossible for her room to have had everything exactly the way that she had left it, which means something went wrong somewhere. And as a reader, I'm going to ask, okay, what went wrong? Did somebody come in? Did somebody not come in? Were they not supposed to come in? Were they supposed to come in? As a reader, I'm asking so many questions, and that is exactly what we want from the very beginning. We want our readers to keep asking questions. So, this is a Yum formula that I want you to remember, that and you know, you'll be like, oh, how do I get to this? You know, how do I write this? How do I write that? Again, of course, as a language teacher, I build narrative skills in multiple classes over time, and in one class I can only do so much. But just to give you a basic idea, remember the three things that we just talked about. Number one, or if I were to sum up the Yum formula real quick as well, I would possibly say that from the very first sentence, your reader should be asking questions. So your reader should have some questions from the very beginning. And that is something that I am hoping that you guys are going to have when you write down your narrative. All right. Better, because this is a master class, I mean a demo class of a sort. Let's not even call it a master class. I can't take questions. So what you can do is you can send me the questions in the Instagram chat, I believe, because I've for privacy purposes and because I know Gen Z and everyone, I've disabled the chat. So what you can do is that you can write down the question somewhere if you're noting things down, and then you can send them to me somewhere, and I can definitely have a look and I can answer them as well. All right. So, what are a few opening types that work? I really want you to spend some time taking a look at this slide and writing it down as well. So, again, I told you in medias res, and the example that I gave you for that was Megamind. So, I'm trying to link this to something that you guys can sort of, you know, relate with as well. Megamind. So in medias res, for those of you who joined us late, it's a Latin term that means in the middle of. So you start off, and this, by the way, I've actually noted these down in the order of how, let's just call it personal preference. I'm not going to lie to you. I've noted them down in the order of personal preference. So complete honesty. So absolutely love action-based openings. Again, a personal preference as a teacher, and stories that start with, you know, basically action-based sequences look absolutely amazing and lovely. So you drop your readers in the middle of the action, basically, and that's generally what we want. So think of these five as your toolkit, and you can remember them, and then it's going to help you generally end up writing a really, really nice story. By the way, what can you write more when it comes to in medias res? In medias res is actually when you talk about something that has already happened. So something that has already happened, and you're just letting your reader in on what has already happened. So looks amazing. Again, in a class in a very structured, limited time period based class, I can only show you this much. Of course, I could have shown you a sample if we had more time, but let's see how much we can get done with. Then we have a direct speech. So, direct speech, starting with a dialogue, is something like I said. It immediately creates a character. So, at the very beginning, we are introduced to a character, and direct speech does that. So, I'm going to write it here. It introduces a character from the very beginning. And this is also lovely. It's a very, lovely opening because someone's saying something, which means there's already a relation, which means there's already a dynamic that's built. And in just one line, for example, if you take a look here, "You're not coming back, are you?" she asked without turning around. In the very beginning, we have two people, a certain kind of attention, and a question that we desperately need answered. So, is this person coming back or not? Why are they not coming back? Why is she even asking them? What is the relationship between these two people? Is that a father and a daughter, or a husband and a wife, or somebody in a relation, or two friends? There are so many questions that I need answered. And that basically does it. So it looks really nice and gets the job done. Betty, like I said, questions on Instagram chat, Instagram window. Third is something that we call the paradox, by the way. So again, for those of you who don't know, paradox is also a literary device. I need a better color, so let's take this one. So paradox is a literary device, by the way, and this is something that we call contradiction. For ease, let's just write on the word contradiction. So contradiction is where there's some kind of, again, how do I put it? Contradiction is when there are opposing ideas put together. That's basically what a paradox is. So, for example, the happiest day of my life began with a funeral. Think about it for a second. Who gets happy when someone passes away? There are so many questions that I have in my mind right now. For instance, someone that they wanted dead, for instance. And why would they want that person dead? Because maybe they were abusing them, which, by the way, is a topic that you are generally not pushed to write down in your Cambridge exams. Maybe I can discuss these real quick by the end of the class as well, or in the last couple of minutes, as in what topics are supposed to be written down and what topics we're not supposed to write down as well. But then again, it creates this really, like it says here, a very irresistible kind of attention. And that is, again, something that we want. All right, next is the sensory hit. Again, not a big fan of this, but I still wrote it down because there are some kids that are naturally inclined to it. This basically means imagery. So, I think most of you would be aware of the word imagery. Imagery is inculcating five senses. So, for example, when you are inculcating any of the senses, that basically creates imagery. So, burnt toast, that was the smell of every Sunday morning for 11 years. And then I want to know, all right, what happens next? Because you are anchoring the reader in a very specific kind of a sensation: smell, sound, taste, touch, something so precise that's going to pull them in the scene. And that is, again, something that we want. So, two words: burnt toast. And suddenly you can smell that. And that's craft. That's writer's craft, as we call it. So, that is, again, really nice. Lastly, again, a very provocative kind of a thing, but a bold statement. So, something provocative. Provocative is anything that provokes someone to do something. So, for instance, I have kept this secret for 23 years. Today it ends. Again, so many questions. Why does um, someone sent me a question? In the narrative, we have to tell the reader what kind of story are we writing. No, that's the opposite of what I said. I said you're not going to tell your narrative. You're not going to tell your reader what kind of story you're writing. You're supposed to let them guess through the wording that you write down. You don't tell them I'm writing a happy story or I'm writing a horror story. No, you let them guess. That's what I'm trying to say. So, no, that's not what I said. All right, so five types. Memorize them. Take a minute, absorb them, use them, mix them. You'll never need to start with a name or a weather again. So, that is something that I want you to remember. There are a few other things that I want you to write down, but wait, let me discuss something with you here. I need a new page. All right. So I want you to write on a few things. What topics can be written down in a Cambridge essay or in a Cambridge exam, and what not to write? All right. So we're going to talk about a few important things as well. Um, Number one, let's talk about genres. So generally speaking, all genres can be written down. So let's get that out of the way as well, that all genres are allowed. What do I mean by that? I mean horror, sci-fi, thriller, adventure, action, romance, violence. Absolutely anything that comes to your mind, you are allowed to write it down. See, when it comes to genres, there's no limit to what you can write down. There are limitations to how much you can write down. So, limitations, I would say, of extent are there. But generally speaking, all genres are allowed. So, what limitations am I talking about and how do I talk about them? So, there are two genres that generally are very commonly discussed, and so I will discuss them real quick. So, for instance, you have a violence based genre, and then you have a romance based genre or love based genre. The two genres that are talked about a lot, and just how much is generally acceptable when it comes to Cambridge. So, for instance, violence, or gore, as you know, a lot of kids call it. So, bloodshed is okay. You can talk about it. We're okay with that. A certain extent, like not too much, not to the point where it makes you queasy or nauseous, but to the point where it's because there are some kids that like talking about wars and stuff. So that's okay. That's okay. But to the point where you get to mutilations, for example, mutilating body parts. There are some kids that do that. When you get into too much detail, then there are some kids that talk about beheadings and, all of that. That's a bit too much. So we're not going to do that. So you can talk about bloodshed, you can talk about wars, you can talk about violence. You can't talk about too much detail to the point where your reader gets, it's very off putting, by the way. So to the point where your reader is off put, generally, you have to ensure that you don't get to that part. In terms of romance or love, there's nothing wrong with love. Just as we have hate and agony and everything else as an emotion, love is also an emotion. And I have had so many kids write down love-based romantic stories over the last couple of years, and they have ended up with A stars as well. That's perfectly normal. Again, an acceptable portion of love-based story is perfectly fine, but to the point where it gets too much, and I believe you guys are smart enough to know that, then we don't recommend them. So if you do want to write it down, we're perfectly okay with that. However, to the point where it's socially acceptable, because it's still in an academic setting and the examiner is still checking your exam and they will be grading you for it as well. So you need to keep a few things in mind. Then what not to write down, because that is really important as well. You're not going to talk about religion. Let's get that out of the way first. The elephant in the room that we need to discuss: no religion at all. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of those things. None of that, please. Um, Give me a minute. All right. Next thing, what else should you not talk about? Creed. So creed is belief. So again, I had a few kids over time ask me whether they can write about Shia Sunni conflict, or for example, a few castes of Hinduism. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that as well. So this is also something that you are not going to do. Other than that, any kind of political discussion, so politics, this is also something that you are not going to write about. Politics, again, political discussion, controversial figures. Can I talk about them in my narrative as well? Again, no. So, controversial people such as Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Obama, Trump, don't name them. Just don't talk about this. Jews, Christianity, all of that. Don't talk about that as well. Other than that, abuse. So, generally speaking, you're not going to talk about abuse as well. What do we mean by that? Um, Mental abuse, social abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and the point is that there's nothing wrong with these topics. We have so many novels and movies based on these topics as well. The reason that examiners don't allow or generally don't recommend these topics is because the age group that you guys are in, which I believe ranges from 13 to 18, teenage age group, um, generally you are very likely to get carried away by emotions. So because of this very reason, I'm telling you the logic behind this as well. Because of the fact that you can get carried away with your emotions, Cambridge is like, generally don't write about them. Inherently, there's nothing wrong talking about it. But again, like I said, because it's very difficult to have, a very, and then you're like, oh man, what if do have that control in my emotions and my writing and everything? I'm still going to advise against it. So, because it's something that, and by the way, I can tell you something very honestly as well that a couple of years ago, we had a kid from in the school that I teach, we had a kid write down a story based on domestic violence. So she was being abused, and she wrote about that story in her Cambridge essay, like the ones that you write in your CIE exams. And then we had Cambridge email us. They were like, "Oh, you have this kid, from this center." And she wrote us this story, and they sent us the script of that story back when scripts were not being shared last year. From last year, scripts have started to be shared, and then they were like, we have received this, so you should check up on her. And we did. Turned out there was actually something wrong going in her home. And then, because writing is meant to be cathartic. So she wrote about all of that in her experience as well. And see, that's the thing. Teenagers, or for any person for that matter, they mimic what's going on in their life as well. So because these are slightly sensitive concepts, we're like, hold on that thought. Don't write it down. So that is the only reason that we recommend against it. And then lastly, and most importantly, suicide. This is also something that I'm going to advise you against at all. Don't kill off a character. Um, and then I had this kid ask me, and I was discussing this a few days ago in my classes in the morning. I had a kid ask me, can a character die? So a character can absolutely die in your story. Just don't go into the details of how the death happened. Because again, the problem is that when that happens or when you kill off a character, there are again multiple things that I wished I could discuss in some other class. But when you kill off a character, you need to ensure that your audience has grown some kind of attachment to that character before you decide to kill them off. Because if I'm killing off a character that I have barely introduced, it's not going to make any difference to my story. The reason is that my audience hasn't engaged with that character yet. And so if I kill them off, it doesn't make a difference. But you know how we have so many seasons and movies where they, for instance, Avengers. I think it was Infinity War Part 2, which was called Endgame, I believe. Yeah. So when Tony Stark dies, when he takes up all of those, stones, and then he ends up, sacrificing himself and for everyone's good. By then, everyone was, and myself included, we cried. We watched that movie in a theater, in a cinema, not a theater, and we cried. The entire audience cried. And that was because we had gained an attachment to that character. If they had killed off Tony Stark in Iron Man 1, nobody would have bat an eyelash. And that is because, nobody cares. They haven't built that kind of an emotional connection with that character yet. So, can I kill off a character? Yes. Do I advise it? No. Why? Because in 350 to 450 words, you are barely getting to the part where the story is relevant, and then you kill someone off and it's like nothing happened. So I hope you understand the logic behind not killing off a character. However, I have a really interesting story that one of my students wrote a couple of years ago, that again, I might share the sample with someone who asks for it, where she talks about the death of her mother, and the way that the story has been narrated um, makes it seem very amazing. So I can share that sample with you some other time, or if you text me or something of that sort. So if you are writing that story from a first person perspective, monologue based, where you are reflecting upon the moments, the last couple of moments spent with your mom, and it has all of that emotional maturity and emotional detailing, then sure, you could absolutely do that. So, this is something that I wanted to discuss with you before moving forth. All right, now I want you guys to take a minute. So think about, please write on this prompt. By the way, those of you who are actually taking this class to learn something, uh, write down this prompt. Um, where you have to write a story that begins with the word. So I'm giving you a few words, yes, but I want you to write down the next. It says here begins, but I'm going to say write a story that includes the word. So let's call it includes. Write a story that includes the words, if only I had realized earlier that she was not the person I thought she was. By the way, whenever you have a sentence like that in your ID or GC exam, because you can end up with, a question like this in both, there are certain limitations, which is, for instance, in this case, first person perspective. So, first person. Can I change this to third? I'm not going to advise this. Most of Cambridge marks are lost because of you guys not adhering to the rubric. The question says, I had realized earlier, which means that you have to absolutely have to write this down in first person perspective. Now, I'm giving you guys 2 minutes. Again, you can't share those with me, but you can practice them yourself using everything that we have discussed, because the best way to understand this everything that we have done is to actually do it. Write one opening line, because we've just discussed it using the yum formula that we just discussed. Keep your reader in mind an unexpected detail and see if there's a mood or a genre that you can build from the very beginning. Try doing that. Just 2 minutes. I'm going to take a break for that. Pause it. You're not going to write down the whole story, not even the first paragraph, just the first line, and that's it. Using this prompt, keep this in mind. If only I had realized earlier that she was not the person I thought she was, which means that this person is going, how do you say it? Internal conflict is basically what this person is going through. Again, I haven't discussed conflict with you yet, but I think you might have an idea of what that is. Internal conflict is when you start questioning your own choices because of so many things that may have happened to you. 2 minutes. I'm going to pause. In a way, it's 45 right now. At 47, I'm going to continue with this. And then once you are done, because I do want you guys to practice, ask yourselves a few questions like the ones that I have here. Um, does it make the reader ask a question? So it, talks about your reader. Is there any unexpected detail? And that's the you. Have I created a mood from somewhere? So don't forget to include the yum formula that we just discussed a while ago. One more minute, and then I will move forward. All right, so it's 47, time's up. If you want me to go through something, take a screenshot of that and send it to me in the chat, and I will take a look at it. Lastly, before we wrap up, I want you to remember something, which is basically, a mix of everything that we have done. Never open with the weather, like I said. Let's lock in what we've discussed today. Number one, like I said, don't give a prelude. Prelude is or a preamble, whatever you want to call this. It's basically an introduction. So no intro or no, how we say a boring beginning. None of that, please. So drop your actors in the middle of the action. That's essentially that's something that's going to make you hopefully end up with a really good impression in the examiner's mind. Less next, first line should create a question. Like I said, the Yum formula. Again, we can build on all of them one by one, but then again, time's short, so we have to really skip to that. Then specific beats general. If there's one advice that I can give you, again, whether you'll take my class again or not, that is entirely up to you. But if there's one advice that I will leave you with, it's that for Cambridge, specificity is something that is always appreciated. So whether it comes to comprehension-based questions, whether it comes to summary writing, for instance, whether it comes to writer's craft, whether it comes to, those language-based questions that we have, whether it comes to discursive, argumentative, or persuasive, which is paper 2, section A, you have to be specific. You need to understand that there is absolutely no space for generalization in Cambridge examination when it comes to English, because I only speak for my subject. So the smell of breakfast is very odd, but then you're like burnt toast. So it's like very specific, oddly specific, if I were to say that. And so I really want you to understand that specificity beats everything any day. And fourth, mood, again, if you want to remember mood, it's basically a vibe that's generated. So keep that in mind. In very simple words, if you are still confused about what mood is, what I'm trying to say is that the genre should be very clear from the very beginning. So there should be an absolute clarity, or like I said, a specificity on the genre from the very beginning. So the genre should be clear to the reader. I should not have to guess. And by the way, if you are somebody who really likes reading or writing thriller stories, I'm going to ask you to read Agatha Christie's novels. So maybe most of you know her. For those of you who don't, she was the it thing before. Who was the writer for Sherlock Holmes? Arthur Conan Doyle. So before Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie was the it thing these days, in those days, because she's a classic writer. So the two amazing detectives that we have are actually Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes. Both of them were created by two amazing writers. One is Agatha Christie, like I said, one is Arthur Conan Doyle. And you can take a look at their books and see how they build momentum over time. And, try using any five from these five, try using any one of them. And yeah, so we came into this class, you guys came into this class, hopefully knowing all of this, I'm assuming, but even if you didn't, now we have a slight structure into what we've learned. And that's basically what narrative is about as well, structuring your ideas together in a very nicely sequenced way so that it gets done with everything. You're leaving with some kind of an idea, some kind of a momentum, and a jump formula as well, which makes me laugh every time I say it because I came up with this, in the morning and I was slightly smiling awkwardly when I was typing it, and I was like, you know what, I am going to go ahead and share this with everyone. But you know what? Like I said, specificity. Be specific. Don't be general. So Yum formula. Remember that, and it's going to yeah look nice. So we did discuss everything, and hopefully you ended up writing a line as well. That's progress, as I call it. So any kind of progress is progress. So in case somebody wanted a demo class for how I teach, this is essentially how usually every lesson looks like, depending on what we're doing. Because on some days we're very serious when we're getting done with, for instance, a past paper question or something of that sort. And on days when we are discussing, this is what it looks like: practical, technical, and designed in such a way that it actually helps you learn something. So, if today felt useful for you guys, I want to quickly let you know that we do have, like I said, I only take one class a day. Sorry, yeah, a day. So we have a batch for October, November going on right now. If there's someone who's preparing for October, November 2026, I do have a batch that's going on. The timings are 7 to 7:40 in the evening, and we have classes from Monday to Thursday. Tests, I usually take them on Friday so that our teaching periods are not, generally spent on tests. We cover everything. I don't really take a very big batch, so because I really believe in individual attentions. So I really hope that you had some idea of how I teach, and I want you to know that this is just a small practice of how we do things every day. We're going to cover everything, past paper practices, directed writing, all of that. Letter, report, article, interview, journal, and speeches. So if you'd like to either join this one or the one that goes on for May, June, the batch that I will have starting for May, June is going to start in October, preferably 5th October. So if you're preparing for May, June, you can either take that batch or this one, depending on how you want to get done with your vacations. You can just get in touch with me on, the Instagram channel where you may have possibly gotten this link from. And that's about it. Thank you so much for being here. You showed up, you wrote, you learned something, and hopefully you can use this in your next paper. Whether you take classes with me or not, I'm always open to answering questions that any student might have, because whether you study from me or not, you're a student in need of guidance, and I will be more than happy to help you out in whatever way that I can. So that is about it. Thank you, and I will see you somewhere later on in any one of my videos. Allah Hafiz.